Joining the Immortals Part 1. Mr. Zhou, of Wenteng, had in his youth been fellow student with a Mr. Cheng, and a firm friendship was the result. The latter was poor, and depended very much upon Zhou, who was the elder of the two. He called Chu's wife his sister, and had the run of the house just as if he was one of the family. Now this wife happening to die in childbed, Zhou married another named Wang, but as she was quite a young girl, Cheng did not seek to be introduced. One day her younger brother came to visit her, and was being entertained in the inner apartments when Cheng chanced to call. The servant announced his arrival, and Zhou bade him ask Mr. Cheng in. But Cheng would not enter, and took his leave. Thereupon Zhou caused the entertainment to be moved into the public part of the house, and, sending after Cheng, succeeded in bringing him back. They had hardly sat down before someone came in to say that a former servant of the establishment had been severely beaten at the magistrate's yamen. The facts of the case being that a cowboy of the Huang family connected with the Board of Rights had driven his cattle across the Zhou family's land, and that words had arisen between the two servants in consequence, upon which the Huang family's servant had complained to his master, who had seized the other and had sent him into the magistrates, where he had been bambooed. When Mr. Zhou found out what the matter was, he was exceedingly angry, and said, "How dares this pig boy fellow behave thus? Why, only a generation ago his master was my father's servant." He emerges a little from his obscurity, and immediately thinks himself I don't know what. Swelling with rage, he rose to go in quest of Huang. But Cheng held him back, saying, "The age is corrupt, there is no distinction between right and wrong. Besides, the officials of the day are half of them thieves, and you will only get yourself into hot water." Zhou, however, would not listen to him, and it was only when tears were added to remonstrances that he consented to let the matter drop. But his anger did not cease, and he lay tossing and turning all night. In the morning he said to his family, "I can stand the insults of Mr. Huang, but the magistrate is an officer of the government, and not the servant of influential people. If there is a case of any kind, he should hear both plaintiff and defendant, and not act like a dog, biting anybody he is set upon. I will bring an action against the cowboy, and see what the magistrate will do to him." As his family rather egged him on, he accordingly proceeded to the magistrates and entered a formal plaint, but that functionary tore up his petition, and would have nothing to do with it. This roused Chu's anger, and he told the magistrate plainly what he thought of him, in return for which contempt of court he was at once seized and bound. During the forenoon Mr. Cheng called at his house, where he learnt that Zhou had gone into the city to prosecute the cowboy, and immediately hurried after him with a view to stop proceedings. But his friend was already in the jail, and all he could do was to stamp his foot in anger. Now it happened that 3 pirates had just been caught, and the magistrate and Huang, putting their heads together, bribed these fellows to say that Zhou was one of their gang, whereupon the higher authorities were petitioned to deprive him of his status as a graduate, and the magistrate then had him most unmercifully bambooed. Mr. Cheng gained admittance to the jail, and, after a painful interview, proposed that a petition should be presented direct to the throne. "Alas," cried Zhou, "here am I bound and guarded, like a bird in a cage. I have indeed a young brother, but it is as much as he can do to provide me with food." Then Cheng stepped forward, saying, "I will perform this service. Of what use are friends who will not assist in the hour of trouble?" So away he went, and Chu's son provided him with money to defray his expenses. After a long journey he arrived at the capital, where he found himself quite at a loss as to how he should get the petition presented. However, hearing that the emperor was about to set out on a hunting tour, he concealed himself in the marketplace, and when His Majesty passed by, prostrated himself on the ground with loud cries and gesticulations. The emperor received his petition, and sent it to the Board of Punishments, desiring to be furnished with a report on the case. It was then more than 10 months since the beginning of the affair, and Zhou, who had been made to confess to this false charge, was already under sentence of death, so that the officers of the board were very much alarmed. When they received the imperial instructions, and set to work to rehear the case in person, Huang was also much alarmed, and devised a plan for killing Mr. Zhou by bribing the jailers to stop his food and drink, so that when his brother brought provisions he was rudely thrust back and prevented from taking them in. Mr. Cheng complained of this to the viceroy of the province, who investigated the matter himself, and found that Zhou was in the last stage of starvation, for which the jailers were bambooed to death. Terrified out of his wits, Huang, by dint of bribing heavily, succeeded in absconding and escaping a just punishment for his crimes. The magistrate, however, was banished for perversion of the law, and Zhou was permitted to return home, his affection for Cheng being now very much increased. But ever after the prosecution and his friend's captivity, Mr. Cheng took a dismal view of human affairs, and one day invited Zhou to retire with him from the world. The latter, who was deeply attached to his young wife, threw cold water on the proposition, and Mr. Cheng pursued the subject no farther, though his own mind was fully made up. Not seeing him for some days afterwards, Mr. Zhou sent to inquire about him at his house, but there they all thought he was at Chu's, neither family, in fact, having seen anything of him. This looked suspicious, and Zhou, aware of his peculiarity, sent off people to look for him, bidding them search all the temples and monasteries in the neighborhood. He also from time to time supplied Cheng's son with money and other necessaries.